Hi there, this is Rabbi Elizabeth Bonnie Cohen, and I am going to be sharing with you today the words that I shared on Shabbat morning, June 6th, 2020, with Congregation Kehillat Israel. In college, I was a volunteer leader for Anytown, a camp aimed at educating a diverse group of teenagers about classism, racism, sexism, and heterosexism by inviting them to examine their own identities and their place in society with honesty, vulnerability, and courage. This week-long program is one of the most intense and transformative experiences I've ever witnessed or had the honor of being part of. Master facilitators guide participants through their discomfort and defensiveness, redirecting their guilt and shame into empathetic allyship. Of the many activities of the week, the one in which we embodied the systemic nature of racism was always one of the most powerful to me. The activity looked like this. All 30 or so of us, counselors and participants alike, stood next to each other in a line, shoulder to shoulder, holding hands in a large field. We were to remain totally quiet throughout the activity. The facilitators would then read a statement, and if it applied to us, we moved from our position as directed. If you were ever in a situation where you were the only one according to your racial or ethnic identity, take one step back. If your relatives or ancestors were forced to come to the United States, take one step back. If you expect a financial inheritance from a family member, take one step forward. If most of your teachers were from the same racial or ethnic background as you, take one step forward. If you believe you have been harassed by someone in authority because of your skin color, take one step back. If you grew up reading books with main characters who mostly resembled your racial or ethnic identity, take one step forward. If one or more of your relatives has been incarcerated, take one step back. If you are more used to seeing actors of your racial or ethnic identity in movie roles as villains, criminals, or blue-collar workers than you are to seeing them as heroes and champions, take one step back. As these statements were read, we moved silently farther and farther apart, dropping hands when our fingertips could no longer cling together, no matter how hard we tried. After the last statement, we looked around us. This was the privilege and the oppression we inherited. As a wealthy, white, well-educated Protestant at the time, I stood at the front of the field. As I looked around, it occurred to me that those in the back, the darkest faces among us, they didn't need to turn around to see their inherited lot. They saw the separation the whole time. Whereas I had to turn all the way around to see what had happened, they watched every step and saw all along the injustice being done. They had no choice but to see it. And that's how privilege works. I don't have to see the oppression if I don't want to. I can choose to keep my back turned, or I can choose to face the terrible injustice present in our society. And I can choose to turn away again whenever I can't take it anymore. When privilege meets power, discrimination becomes embedded into our systems and into our consciousness in a way that perpetuates the imbalance of resources, access to opportunity, and overt oppression such as socially accepted violence in language and action. We are inheritors of this broken system. And while we subconsciously contribute to it as people of faith, as Jewish people of faith, we must choose to actively work against it. Our scripture doesn't parse its words about our charge to hear the cries of the oppressed, to use our power to lift up those society has tossed aside. In fact, it's so clear and pervasive in our sacred texts that these passages have become almost trite. I practically cringe at the thought of quoting fierce words of our tradition in this D'Var Torah, like justice, justice, you shall pursue, or at the idea of highlighting fundamental notions like tikkun olam, because they've become so commonplace that we see them on bumper stickers and memes that both devalue their core directive while simultaneously lifting up their centrality to us as a Jewish people. Our most basic story as Jews is that we were oppressed And our liberation demands that we activate our empathy and even our holy rage when face to face with the oppression of others. If we truly believe that all humanity is made in the image of God, that we are all carriers of the divine within us, how can we not respond to seeing that divine spark extinguished with grief, horror, and a passion to make our world more whole? Amidst this moment of crisis, I also see deeply penetrating hope. Racial injustice is not new, yet at the same time, something feels different about this moment. People, especially white people, seem to be paying attention in a new way, committing not just to Facebook posts, but to reading lists, not just to asking their Black friends what to do, but to taking the burden upon themselves to find resources available to educate and activate as effective allies in this work. A friend said to me that as she watched the video of George Floyd's last moments, the almost 9 minutes of suffocation he endured, she couldn't help but feel as if she was watching a modern-day lynching. When we allow ourselves to access the fullness of the emotions of this moment, I think many of us feel that too. And the trauma of bearing witness to such horrific injustice has shattered us. It's fitting that the word for crisis in Hebrew, mashber, comes from shaver, meaning shattered. The reality is that we've been broken for a long time, but the cracks have given way, leaving us shattered to bits, emotionally, politically, spiritually. Shards of ourselves surround us on all sides, and we can't move without feeling the pain of them piercing into our flesh, our soul. But I said I was hopeful. And that's because, as I was reminded this week, mashber, crisis, also means birthing stool, that which holds the potential for new life. What will this moment birth? How can we play the role of midwives to a more just society? You may say, that's all well and good, but it's more complicated than that. And you're right, it is. I'm the granddaughter of a police officer. I've seen Jewish peers excluded from social action protests for their devotion to Zionism. I've seen Black Jews feeling betrayed by their own communities, left voiceless in both identities they hold. I've seen the anti-Semitic slurs graffitied on synagogues by rioters while the congregants of those synagogues march in the streets with their Black and brown neighbors. This is not easy stuff. But there's nothing easy about giving birth. It takes time. It's painful. It's messy, very, very messy. It's dangerous and scary and holy and miraculous and awe-inspiring. And we do it again and again. And so many people put their bodies and their relationships through so much to make it possible in the first place, because ultimately, the hope of bringing new life into this world is worth it all. This is a birthing moment. And I pray that we can have the strength to keep pushing, to keep breathing, to keep screaming if we have to, whatever it takes to create the world worthy of divine presence. Shabbat Shalom.